Good morning and welcome back to World Talks, where every word matters here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Now, in a disturbing trend, yet another high-profile figure from Russia's elite has been found dead under mysterious circumstances. Now, Mikhail Rogachev, a Russian oligarch and former vice president of the oil giant Yukos, reportedly died after falling out of a window of his 11th floor apartment in Moscow. Now, while authorities have suggested suicide, questions remain as Rogachev joins a growing list of prominent Russians who have died in unexplained ways. Now, to explore what this pattern might reveal about the inner workings of Russia's elite, I'm joined by Dorka Takácsy, researcher at the Center for Euro-Atlantic Integration and Democracy. Good morning. Thank you so much for being with us here this morning on TVP World Talks.
Good morning.
So, Rogachev's death is the latest in a series of these mysterious fatalities among Russia's elite, something we've really been witnessing throughout the years, really. Now, how significant is this pattern? What does this indicate about the current situation that's unfolding in Russia?
Well, it clearly is a trend, and eventually, since the start of the invasion, we can already count over 50 of such cases, which are basically assassinations by purported suicide. Obviously, the reasons behind might differ highly, plus also they didn't exactly start with the start of the invasion. There have already been certain cases, if you remember, during COVID. So when at the beginning of the COVID, there were certain COVID doctors in Russia sharing the same faith, such as falling out of the window. However, we have seen it in an increasing number, with an increasing frequency in the last 2 years. Obviously, many of them can be linked to politics, because eventually political assassinations by purported suicide can be calculated and counted as a category on its own. Obviously, here the ambiguity around the death of someone is strategically and deliberately created. So eventually there is the explanation, which is for the public. It is for everybody that obviously there was a suicide. However, as a message to the other parts and the other members of these elite circles can be rather different. So in many cases, when we see these ambiguities, which can be seen here as well, with regards to the credibility of the suicide history of Mikhail Rogachev. So eventually the story can rather be different from reality.
Right, a lot of discrepancies there, of course, between a focus of two narratives, particularly the one coming out of Russia. But Ms. Takácsy, now many of these deaths involve high-profile figures connected to the energy industry. Now, is there a common thread linking these individuals, particularly those from companies like Yukos and Lukoil?
I would argue that yes and no. So eventually we can see that the majority of these cases, yes, are linked to figures, and not even necessarily to the top leadership, but people closer to the middle level management, which seems rather difficult to explain why. However, yes, it is true that most of them are linked to the energy sector, which, according to certain conspirations, because obviously we have a lot of uncertain information with these regards. So according to certain speculations, the fact that these people are predominantly, although not exclusively, linked to the energy sector might mean that some of these people had certain plans, were about to get a bigger independence in certain aspects, which were absolutely undesired by someone else on a higher level. So eventually we can see that the number of people linked to the energy sector is high. However, we have also seen recently certain people from the banking sector and also leading economists. So I would say that it is far from being exclusively a phenomenon with concerning people from the energy sphere, but in a broader sense, yes. So eventually, I think that here the messages are for the inner members of these elites. And obviously here the story which is being told to outsiders is rather different, with this silent agreement from the society side that, well, basically everybody knows it was not a suicide, but everyone pretends to believe it.
Now, how could all these mysterious deaths, you've mentioned that there were, some over 50 cases, right, since COVID. How is this impacting Russia's economic and political stability?
In a way, I think it has the impact of keeping people in the same tribe. So it discourages people from taking independent decisions, which might go against the will of the top leadership, which can definitely overreach the top leadership of the company itself. So I think that here the role of the Kremlin is definitely a very, very important one, and it cannot be overlooked. So here, when we are talking about who might order these assassinations, if we take them as such, we definitely have to think about the Kremlin in the background. So eventually, I would say that these are messages for people within the circle, and it serves to keep the tribe together and to discourage them from probably even diverting from the orders which they receive from the top.
I really like how you're mentioning that it's actually one big tribe, almost like a sect. Mr. Takácsy, could you elaborate a bit on the political history of Yukos? I mean, Rogachev was the former vice president of Yukos.
Absolutely. So Yukos was basically one of the largest oil companies in Russia, and definitely we have to mention here the name of Mikhail Rogachev, who since a number of years is already living in London and is formerly also he's gone out of politics formerly. The company itself collapsed in 2007, and ever since, Mikhail Rogachev has not really been in the forefront of news, of public life, or anything whatsoever. So I would say that he has not really been a public figure, unlike Mikhail Rogachev, of course, who had a different history. So eventually we can see that he clearly was a very, very powerful man at once. However, his power, although he might have kept some of that, but it was surely in the background. So he was not in the forefront of either public attention or political activities in the recent years, and probably even decade.
What can you tell us about Rogachev's relationship with Vladimir Putin?
Well, frankly speaking, we don't know much about it. So this is one of the things which is rather mysterious. So as of the information we have access to at the moment, we cannot really clearly see what was over there. So there were also no signs, no clashes, especially not public clashes between him and Putin. So there is a lot to unpack there.
But don't you think that, given the fact that this has almost become a pattern, a little bit of what you mentioned, that most of these deaths may be linked particularly to the individuals who opposed Putin's views or somewhat shifted from his stance?
Yes, it might easily happen. However, these conglomerates rather stay in the background. So eventually, if we look at for instance, energy companies and these business circles, these elites are super discreet about their decisions, about their connections, and so on. So it is very rare, for instance, for leading Russian political elite members to take any disputes to the publics. So of course there are several occasions when there are documents being leaked, or when from these leaked documents we can draw conclusions with regards to debates within the inner circles. However, we, especially here from the West, have less and less access to information from these circles, especially because of this tendency that the Russian information space is closing down and the Kremlin is actively taking part of it. So eventually it's very difficult to get credible information, especially from what is happening within the elite. So this is why such histories rather remain shady in the eye of the public.
It's almost as though it's really a movie that we're seeing develop in front of us. Now, what are the broader international implications of these deaths for businesses or governments that interact with Russia's elite?
It's a good question whether it has palpable implications or immediate implications for business partners from abroad, but it surely does not increase their trust towards, for instance, bringing FDI to Russia and implementing new investments in Russia. However, obviously, there are many other reasons for that. Let's think about the sanctions. Let's think about the current geopolitical situation and so on. So I would say that this probably does not have an imminent impact on the relations, on the business relations from foreign countries. However, altogether, it does not increase the trust, for sure.
Mr. Takácsy, today President Vladimir Putin is hosting the BRICS summit in Kazan, where leaders including Indian Prime Minister, Chinese President are expected to attend. Now, there are rumors, reports circulating that UN Chief Antonio Guterres will also be paying a visit to Kazan. Can you confirm these reports?
Well, me personally not. I also read these news and I'm looking forward to read more. So I myself cannot confirm it, but I'm surely going to follow it from a close distance.
Now, what do you think that the discussions that Putin is going to be holding for the next 3 days at this summit is, how could they influence Russia's position on the global stage, particularly regarding the war in Ukraine and Western sanctions?
Well, what we can clearly see is that I think that this summit serves the primary goal, the primary goal of all this is to present Russia in the eye of the world as an actor who is absolutely not isolated, especially so since the sanctions and all these measures aim at isolating Russia and separating it from the rest of the world. So what Russia aims to portray with this summit organized in Kazan is that eventually by gathering there some of the leading figures of the world, of world politics, obviously excellent pictures are going to be taken there where Vladimir Putin is actually shaking hands with everybody. So opposing the other narrative, as of which is being isolated. So I think that basically this is clearly the main goal here, to portray Russia as not being isolated at all, and Vladimir Putin himself as being not isolated from the rest of the world's leaders. However, what they are going to talk about mostly is probably the fact that the BRICS countries, when they trade with each other,
Mrs. Takácsy, I'm sorry, we're out of time, but really interesting how this is becoming a war of narratives on two fronts. But thank you so much for your input, Dorka Takácsy, Researcher, Center for the Euro-Atlantic Integration and Democracy, for giving us your input this morning on World Talks.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Up next, news. Stay tuned.